So I just got done recording Hobbes, and now we're going to be moving on to the Locke. Don't be confused. I just want to read the paper prompt again. So again, same thing. I'm going to have this kind of a preamble. I'm going to kind of give you the basics, and then we'll move through it. This one probably will be a little bit longer. But yeah, I was surprised. The last one was about 23 minutes. So again, you have to choose two thinkers in this next paper, paper 3, standard 2-page length. Summarize 2 of the author's conceptions of the state of nature. So again, with Hobbes, if you haven't seen the last video, pretty short, nasty, and brutish. There's no kind of moral system with which to restrict people's actions, and they're just trying to preserve their life, and so they're going to agree to the ideal form of government, an absolutist system. So that's your recap of Hobbes, and now we're moving on to Locke. So Locke's going to kind of have this more democratic interpretation, but again, it's focused on, say, liberalism. So what's liberalism? Well, liberalism is the focus on the individual. And so with Locke, he starts with the same kind of process, and I'll go through these with the quotations again. So things to take away with Locke are that he does not think that the state of nature is as bad as what Hobbes does. And there are quotations in here where he's directly kind of criticizing the Hobbesian state of nature and social contract, because he says, like, you know, this is a misunderstanding, and actually if you were to agree to an absolutist system, right, you actually are still in the state of nature. You haven't really moved out of it. So again, these kind of metaphysical commitments, so again, there's not really a world of God in Hobbes' world, which means that people are kind of dog eat dog. There's no 10 commandments, or there's no worry about hell. And so this is why it's like the fear of your life is what's going to move you into the state of nature. But for Locke, that's not the case. There's a definite Judeo-Christian undertone, and what's going to keep you in check with regards to your actions and your moral actions is that the 10 commandments. These exist prior to government for Locke. And so the reason why I don't kill my neighbor is because it's a sin and I would go to hell. And it's hell, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with this kind of religious rhetoric, it's supposed to be the worst thing ever. So it's like, well, I don't want to do that. So there's a whole different motivation that moves people out of the state of nature. So hopefully that's making sense. That's actually critically important for this first section of the paper. If it does not make sense, feel free to ask me. So we have a different metaphysics. Metaphysics means after physics, things that exist. And this base essentially is God, hell, conceptions like that. And so Locke does not think that people are going to be so nasty and brutish. He thinks that, yeah, the state of nature is not that bad. People can actually get along. There's something else that kind of happens that motivates people to leave this. And again, what makes it legitimate, like with Hobbes, well, everyone would come to this realization that they're going to die and they want to be alive. And so they all agree to the sovereign or the absolutist governments, right? The agreement, again, this is not coercion. They're freely choosing this. And you just don't have many options for Hobbes. It's like, well, you'll be dead, or you'll have this person, you have to follow their directions. For us, it seems like not a choice, but for a person in that situation, yeah, okay, fine, I'll take it. You only have 2 options here: be alive and have a pretty decent life, or have a miserable death. You know, for Locke, it's a little bit different. And so again, you want to improve your conditions. So for him, it doesn't make sense to leave the state of nature where there's no government, there's no rules, there's no laws, there's no enforcement, there's no police, because again, you have a lot of more explicit natural rights. Right, so for Hobbes, your natural right was, well, I can have agreement. I can agree to a state. For Locke, there's many more of these kind of like abstract metaphysical ideas. Okay, I think that's enough of me pontificating here. Let's see. So here's a picture of John Locke. He says, "We must consider what state all men are naturally in, and that is a state of perfect freedom to order their actions and dispose of their possessions." So again, now we're getting to this kind of contemporary discussion of possessions and property, which again, Marx, when we get to that, definitely spent time in the London Library reading Locke and reading these thinkers, right? So dispose of their possessions, which is an expression of your freedom, your individual freedom, right? And persons as they think fit. With the bounds of the state of nature, right? So I can do things within essentially the laws of God, but other than that, I'm allowed to do what I want with my stuff, with my body, with no one having any real say about that. So in the state of nature, everyone is equal, but again, this is different than in the state of nature for Hobbes. No one has power over anyone else, right? So for Hobbes, it was like, well, we're all equally perverse, we can all kill each other. But Locke's saying something different. Maybe we're all equal under God's eye, and so we don't really have power to order someone to do anything. Only God can do that, right? Locke also notes that the state of nature is still governed by the laws that everyone must follow. This makes the state much more orderly than what we saw of Hobbes's presentation. The execution of the law of nature is in that state put into every man's hands, whereby everyone has a right to punish transgressor of that law to such a great degree as may hinder its violation. Right. So if someone comes and takes your stuff, you can come out of your farmhouse with your shotgun and you can essentially defend your property. There's no one to tell you not to do that or how to do that. And so this is what kind of keeps people in check, is everyone has this power to kind of essentially enforce the natural law. I easily grant that civil government is the proper remedy for the inconveniences of the state of nature. So again, here I think kind of makes this distinction, the inconveniences of the state of nature, which I'll talk about, which must certainly be great where men may be judges in their own case. So again, he doesn't think the state of nature is that bad, so there has to be a problem big enough to motivate and move out of the state of nature. Where again, I think for Hobbes, it's just much more intuitive. You're going to be dead, so fix it, make it better. Men living together according to reason, without a common superior on earth with authority to judge between them, is properly the state of nature. So when there's not a kind of superior or something with more authority than you, then you're in a state of nature. But force, or a declared design of force upon the person of another, where there is no common superior on earth to appeal to for relief, is the state of war. So as soon as someone tries to impose their will on you, now you've entered into a state of war. But the thing that's different with Locke is that, unlike Hobbes, you're not always going to want to do that. That is a possibility that could occur, but you're not always trying to dominate your fellow human beings. There's a lot of work and energy, and you risk your life doing that. So only particular circumstances would arise. The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth. Right? So men people don't really do want to be free, and not to undermine the will of the legislative authority of man, but to have only the law of nature for his rule. The liberty of man in society is to be under no legislative power, but that established by consent. So again, we're going to have this kind of natural right of agreeing to things. And this means what makes it so powerful, and why these arguments still last for today, like with thinkers like with Rawls, which we'll get to, is you freely agree to it, right? So it seems so common sense, I think, and hopefully you're grasping it. If I try to get you out of your chair, if you didn't want to, you could grab your chair. You can say, I'm not doing it. And I go, why? Well, because I don't want you to tell me what to do, nerd. But if I said, well, I'll give you $100 and I'll give you $1,000, and you go, well, I agree to that. It's so much easier, but less energy is spent. It's much more orderly, and you're going to willingly. And it's because of that, because you're doing it yourself. You've been motivated to follow these actions yourself. Kind of like a little asterisk here to kind of designate this as an important quotation. Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right but himself. The labor of his body and the work of his hands, he may say, are properly his. Whatsoever then he removes out of the state of nature hath provided and left in it, he hath mixed his labor with and joined it for something that is his own, and thereby makes it his property, right? So with Hobbes, there was no discussion of having private property in a state of nature, because it made no sense. It was essentially just might makes right. But for Locke, that's not the case. There is private property, because God gives you essentially a body. You own yourself. God could, essentially own you, but no one else can essentially impose power on your body. So the things you do with your body, then you have inextricably tied to a material object. So if I build a shelf, right, like this all comes in pieces, that I get the screws and I screw them in, right? This shelf is not just a bunch of wood. It's wood and time I put into making it, right? And I can't go to the store and go like, well, I want my money back for the shelf, but I also want the 2 hours I spent making that. It makes no sense. And so that inextricable attribute of the object is what makes it yours, right? So there's a kind of like a piece of me in my property, right? So again, this isn't like you're going to the store. It's like a person owning a farm and owning this stuff. So he said, I own myself. I own what my body does with stuff. And so when I put my labor into something, in the natural state of nature, I have a natural right to property. But it's not necessarily a meaningful right, because again, might makes right still kind of persists. There's no supreme authority in this world. As much as anyone can make use of any advantage of life before it spoils, so much he may by his labor fix a property in. Whatever is beyond this is more than his share and belongs to others. Nothing was made by God for man to spoil. So again, here's this kind of natural limit. So basically saying God says you can't spoil stuff. So let's say I'm a farmer and I make a bunch of watermelons, and I can only eat, say, 5 of my 6 watermelons, and someone comes along and takes the 6th one. I go, hey, that's mine. He goes, there's no way you're going to get to this. It's going to go bad. And so now I put my body and I put my energy into picking up the watermelon and shoving it in my face. Now it's yours. So again, there's a limit to your private property, right? For Locke, and then one of the things that Marx we're not going to read this, but Marx is going to criticize is the creation of money is what's going to limit spoilage, right? So limits of property is spoilage. The creation of money through people's consent agreement is used to avoid this problem, right? So again, this is something that I've noted in the readings just because this is something that is in the background for our Marx reading when we get to that. Right, so obviously you can accumulate a bunch of wealth, and you can't say people also are entitled to it because it's not spoiling. Like money and coin money and paper money doesn't go bad, which is something that Marx is going to reject, right? For different kind of moral reasons. Man hath by nature a power not only to preserve his property. That is, so again, property here is not just like things you own. He's saying because you own yourself. So it's property here is different than the way we think about it. It's your life, it's your liberty, and your estate, which comes directly from, Thomas Jefferson getting this directly from Locke. He said we change estates, which is the way we would think of property, things you own, to happiness. And that goes back to the slavery issue. The injuries and attempts of other men, but to judge of and punish the breaches of that law in others as he persuaded and the offenses deserve, even with death itself in crimes where the heinousness of the fact, in his opinion, requires it. So maybe someone killed my family member, I'm going to kill them back. But because no political society can be nor subsist without having in itself the power to preserve property, right? So again, you can do these things. You have this kind of right to punish crimes, but this is what you're going to have to give up to move into a civil society for Locke, right? Because you cannot have a stable society. And so the duty of the society, the civil society, this kind of liberal democracy for Locke is going to be in its ability to preserve property. Whereby it is easy to discern who are and are not in political society together, those who are united into one body and have common established laws and judicature to appeal to with authority to decide controversies between them and punish offenders are in a civil society with one another. Okay, so I think I have a few more notes, but I'll give you my famous Danny Kono farm example to kind of explain some of this stuff and maybe make more context. So in class I would have written on the board, right? But so imagine you have two farms in the state of nature. My hands are roughly the size of the farms. I can't figure this out here. Okay. And so instead of that, imagine my hands are right next to each other. So again, just imagine two rectangles, but they're actually right next to each other. Let's do this in your head. And they're my property and person. We'll call them, I don't know, person B. So person A and person B. So person A, they have this farm, they're next to each other, and every day they go out and they tend their farm and they put water and they pull the weeds and they do all this stuff. But actually in the middle of, in their farm, this will be and is that, so imagine it's in the middle, but right, equally half and half is an apple tree. And every day in the morning, person A comes and weeds the apple tree and puts water in it. And then in the afternoon, person B does the same thing. And they, for somehow we magically know they put the same amount of labor into it, right? But then as winter comes or as fall comes, they do their calculations and they look at the apple tree and both of them come to the realization that they need to collect one more apple to survive the winter, right? Or they're going to die. So the stakes are pretty high. And then they both kind of come over the hill and they both kind of aren't paying attention. They grab the apple and they both grab the apple at the same time. And the problem there is like they have both kind of put their equal labor into the property. They both kind of own it, but they both cannot share it or one of them will die, right? So you need the whole apple to survive. And this is what Locke is saying is like, now we need a secure property. We need a way of resolving this dilemma. And if we don't, we just enter back into a state of nature that is actually more like the Hobbesian state of war. Because I realize I need the apple to live. My neighbor realizes he or she needs the apple to live. And so we're not going to come to an agreement. We're going to fight for it because our lives are at stake, right? So justice dictates, I have the supreme right to my life. And so, yeah, even if I kill this person, it's not against the law or the rules in a state of nature. So then what Locke comes to the realization is that civil society has to give this benefit. It's not merely just protection of my life. It's going to be protection of my property. And this is more complicated than the Hobbesian's formulation. It's you need this kind of liberal democratic structure to kind of solve it. So the first thing he says, what we're already kind of talked about, is you're in a civil society when you have judges. And so, what was it? Yeah, here, right? And so once you have judges, what's a judge? It's a third party who's neutral. So it's not going to be the person's grandma making the decision. Okay, so I need someone who's going to be able to say whose apple it is. But judges make decisions off of laws. So how do you make laws? Well, they're things that people have agreed to or they have voted for people to make. And so we've consented to them, which makes the laws legitimate. So we need another thing called a legislature. So what we have that, like the Congress. So what does the legislature do? What does another branch of government do? It makes the laws that the judiciary uses to make decisions, like fair decisions, like carry out justice. Okay, but then just because the judge uses the laws to come to a decision, and what happened if I'm person A, and they go, well, we found out that it belonged according to the law. If you've put if the apple fell on a Friday and this person picks it up, then it's their apple. I'm not gonna say I'm holding the apple for some reason. I guess I lost the case. Here's the apple. That's not going to happen, right? When criminals get charged with a crime and they're guilty, they don't go, okay, promise to go to jail next week and stay in there for 20 years. No, like how is jail? It's coercive power. A police officer puts you in chains and carries you and puts you in a locked room, and then they watch you and make sure you stay in there. It's on shifts for 20 years or whatever, right? So that's the executive power. Okay. So again, that's hopefully it's making more sense with things we've talked about. And this is all how private property works. You need a state to make laws to recognize private power, secure that, which is what you're agreeing to when you move into a state of nature. You give up your right to protect your own property, to enforce punishments on other people. You say the state can do that, right? So again, this is why you get in trouble if I was going to be driving down the road and pull you over. What's this crazy asshole with long hair pulling me over for? I have no authority to do that, but we've all kind of agreed for police to do that when people are breaking the laws, right? So that's part of these kind of arguments we're having now, but that's an aside from this stuff. So hopefully that amazing diatribe I just gave you makes sense. So you need essentially 3 things before you agree to move out of the state of nature. Because I'm agreeing in order to preserve my property, because that is essentially also going to preserve my life, right? I'm not going to end in the state of war that I just kind of mentioned. So to have these kind of judgments that are fair, I need a judiciary branch, or I need judges. Second, I'm going to need a legislative branch, or someone that makes laws. And third, I'm going to need essentially an executive branch, or someone that enforces the laws and makes them meaningful. Okay, so the advantage of a civil society for Locke isn't so much of like just the preservation of my life. It's this whole kind of apparatus of property and my life that makes my life better. And this is why he thinks the Hobbesian conception doesn't make much sense, because you don't secure anything after your right to life, right? So again, you can tell the Hobbesian stuff wasn't concerned with property. And from Locke's perspective, you would never agree to a situation that doesn't make you better off. How do I know I'm not better off in the Hobbesian position? Because I can have property in a state of nature. It's just not as secure as it would be in a civil society. Please ask me questions if that doesn't make sense. It makes sense to me, but I've also been studying this stuff for like forever. When people in a civil society, they give up the power, to punish offenses that they were able to in the state of nature. Locke holds that absolutism of Hobbes is still a state of nature in Locke's formulation of society. You need impartial judges. On page 304 of my reading, Locke points out rational people would not agree to a situation that makes them worse off, right? So you have this kind of natural ability to kind of make agreements, but again, you have this kind of capacity to reason. You're like, wait, I'm not actually better off in the Hobbesian world, so I would never agree to it. At least that's what Locke thinks. Hobbes doesn't think that. The only way that whereby anyone divests themselves of his natural liberty and puts the bonds of civil society is by agreeing with other men to join and unite into a community. Okay, so again, once you kind of make this agreement, now you've given up your rights to your property and things like that. Not the rights to your property, but the right to secure your property. Notes. Note, once we establish a civil society through consent, we are committed to make subsequent agreements through majority rule, something he talks about in the reading. This further entails that people give up the power in the state of nature, like punishing crimes they experience, to the majority. So again, now we're going to have this kind of democratic system, right? Because we realize that you kind of need majority rule to kind of come to decisions. That's the most fair way. It's not the best way. There's still problems, but it's the most kind of fair outcome that you can have. Let's see where I was at. Every man hath any possession or enjoyment of any part, dominions of any government, doth thereby give tacit consent, unspoken consent, tacit, and is far forth obliged to the obedience of laws of that government. So again, that might seem weird, but you kind of do this when you travel. When you go to other countries, you do agree to follow their laws, even though if you don't even know what their laws are. You kind of tacitly agree to that, because you know that if you act a fool in a particular country, they can kick you out or put you in jail still. Right? So you never agree to any of those laws. You recognize the kind of sovereign power of France or Canada or Mexico or wherever you're going. And then men, when they enter into society, give up the equality, liberty, and executive power. So again, we already talked about that. This equality thing is interesting, that they had in the state of nature. Yet, it being only with an intention in everyone that better preserves himself, his liberty and property, for no rational creature can be supposed to change his condition with an intention to be worse. So again, you would never agree to this if you would lose your life or have no property. The power of society or legislative constituted by them can never be supposed to extend further than the common good. And so one of the things to keep in mind is that what distinguishes this kind of account from Hobbes is that no one's above the law. Everyone's subject to it, because you would never agree to an absolutist system because it would make you worse off. But you've also given up having this kind of equality, which is basically I can have as much stuff that I can have depending on how hard I work, right? So everyone is equal. Their outcomes might be different in a state of nature, but everyone's equal in that regard because it's just how much you work. But that might not be the case in society, right, with money and things like that. So you kind of agree to this kind of inherent inequality, and then obviously Marx is going to come along and challenge that presupposition, because he's saying, like, well, you might be unequal, but you're still going to have property, you're still going to have protection of your life for Locke, and you're going to agree to that civil society. And then we'll get to Rousseau. I think, again, I know I'm talking about Marx a lot, but he was very influenced by these thinkers, and I think Marx was basically critiquing Locke and very influenced by the way that Rousseau is thinking about things, even though he's not going to agree to like these kind of conceptions of property that Rousseau also agrees to. So he kind of uses the logic behind the Rousseauian world. So I guess these videos are actually useful for the Marx, because again, those videos are going to be probably longer, and I'm not going to be able to cover everything. Power to punch. Man, I am so bad. Yeah, this will definitely get reposted. So that's it for now. Hopefully this is under 30 minutes, and I will see you guys in the next video.